where, when, and how India and the modern world. Learning about India and the modern world. Sources of information of modern Indian history. Of the three periods of history, modern history has the most abundant sources of information to draw on. Sources of information can be of two types, primary and secondary. Primary source. Primary sources of information are those that are original or created at the time of the event by people who witnessed the event. Artifacts from archaeological sites, coins, monuments, inscriptions, travelogues, autobiographies, etc. are all primary sources of information. For modern Indian history, primary sources of information also include government reports, letters, photographs, maps, diaries, newspapers, magazines, and films. A lot of this material has been preserved in government museums and archives from which they can be accessed when needed. Secondary sources. Secondary sources of information are second-hand accounts or events. They are usually collected and put together by people who study the primary sources. Secondary sources include textbooks, biographies, magazines, newspapers, and movies about historical events. Both primary and secondary sources should be checked for bias, partially, or exaggeration. This becomes particularly true when dealing with modern Indian history, where the British account of things is often vastly different from how Indians of the time have written about it. Books, newspapers, and magazines. The printing press, which were invented in Germany in the 15th century, came into common use in India in the 18th century. This resulted in the mass printing of books, newspapers, magazines, and pamphlets, which are important sources of information for historians today. Books were printed both in English and in various regional languages. Many biographies of great people were written, which gives us authentic information about the people and the times in which they lived. Max Muller wrote about the Vedas and Indian philosophy, though he had never been to India. His theories were to influence Western thoughts on India for several decades. Government documents. British officials maintained proper records of all official transactions, government orders, acts, and other important decisions of government had to be meticulously recorded. Historians have a rich fund of official British documents, official letters and correspondence, survey maps, district gadgets, and census record to refer to. Many of these are now preserved in National Archives of India and the National Museum, New Delhi. Government museums in Chennai, Mumbai, and Kolkata also possesses original documents of that time, like letters written by Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi. Historical buildings. The British built several buildings during their 2000-year rule in India, some of which are still fairly preserved. Some are, in fact, still in use. They represent a style very different from that preferred by the medieval rulers or India. Some of them were built to mark important events of the time. For example, the imposing gateway to India was built to commemorate the visit of King George V and Queen Mary to Bombay in 1911. The Victoria Memorial, Calcutta, is a magnificent white marble building set up in memory of Queen Victoria, who died in January 1901. Built between 1906 and 1921, this monument serves as both a mausoleum and a museum to house artifacts belonging to the British rule. Summary. For modern Indian history, the primary sources of information are government reports, letters, photographs, maps, diaries, newspapers, magazines, etc. These are protected in archives and museums. The secondary sources of information on modern Indian history are writings and accounts by various peoples. The buildings erected by the British also serves as an important source of history of that period. That is all in this lesson. Keep learning.